Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you doing today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is great. Everything here is wonderful. And today, another book review. Why not? It's only been 2 episodes since the last one, so let's do another one. I just finished this book, and it's only been 4 days, so that tells you a little bit going up front. But in case you aren't aware, I am working on my own story idea. So the last couple of months have been a lot of intense study. I've discovered how much work goes into writing, and I don't want to start a book that I'm never going to finish because I don't know how to finish it. So I've been doing all of the preloading, all of the story creation up front, so that when it comes time to start typing, I can just start typing. So this book is part of my research for that. It's also a book I've wanted to read for quite a while, and it is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Now, I will say I've wanted to read this for a while. I think it came out in 2012. Does that sound about right? Something like that. And I've wanted to read it for a while, but I kind of was like turned off by the title because it sounds kind of like Charles Xavier's School for the Gifted, or it gives this idea that you're going to follow some peculiar children through their school or whatever, Hogwarts, blah. And honestly has little to nothing to do with Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. There is a home for these children, but it's such an insignificant part of the story that it kind of doesn't matter. So if the title has put you off, if the idea of visiting a place where children with special powers exists, just look past that. And I will say that right up front, I like the book. Obviously, I finished it in 4 days, so it can't be terrible. It does read very easily, so it's not like I struggled through a hard-to-read book. It's a pretty simple, pretty easy-to-read book. The author's writing style is very conversational, with the exception of a few phrases that kind of get brought up a little too frequently in weird spots, but the premise of the book kind of sets it up so that those phrases make sense. You'll understand if you get to reading it. I would say that if it's turned you off because you thought it was a story about another adventure where a kid becomes something that he's not and goes to school to learn how to be better, don't worry about that. That's not really what the story is about at all. Part of the reason I wanted to read it for my current study for my story is the character in this book is similarly aged and in a similar mental situation to the character that I want to write. So it was a really good kind of character study. That being said, I'm going to now probably tell you a whole bunch of stuff that you don't want to know if you plan on reading the book, so you should probably stop watching if you plan on reading the book. Otherwise, stay tuned. This is Ransom Riggs' first novel, and it shows. I don't mean that derogatorily. He's a very good writer, so his sentence structure, his paragraphs, his pacing, all really good, all really well done. But the character story is... The 3-act structure is there. It kind of always finds its way in, but it feels like the book wasn't written for a 3-act structure, and that's pretty indicative of a new author. That being said, it works fine. His 3rd act is like super compressed. 2nd act is this really huge long thing. 3rd act is like this tiny little fraction of the story. That's okay, because it sets up more books. I think there's 4 of them. We'll go there. So, but the story does open very similarly to the child who finds out he's more than he is. Starts off with his grandfather telling him all these fantastical stories about these children that he knew who had all these special powers. And as the main character grew up, he kind of learned that this is all just fake. Like it's all just grandpa's imagination, and he stops believing, and he tells his grandfather that. But it culminates in his grandfather ultimately being murdered, and Jacob finds his dead grandfather and sees the creature that killed his grandfather, who happens to be this weird figure with like tentacles coming out of its mouth and definitely not a human. And Jacob thinks he's mental and goes to a psychiatrist. His family tells him that it was an animal and blah, blah, blah. And he starts to believe them, even though he trusts his own eyes. And he starts to question Grandpa's validity, and he decides that he's going to heed his grandfather's last words and seek out Miss Peregrine's school for peculiar children. And he does that. And it's on an island in Wales. It has like 100 people living on it and no electricity in this backwoods area. And so he goes on this adventure to find this school, and he finds a completely ruined school that was bombed during World War II. And that's that. But as it turns out, all is not as it seems. He discovers there are children still in the area. They just aren't living in the present. They have a sort of a time loop that they live in. And that time loop is set up by Miss Peregrine. So in the book, a bunch of kids, a bunch of characters. I shouldn't say kids. A bunch of characters have these special powers. There's a child that has bees living in him. There's a kid that can make, inanimate objects come back to life. There's a girl who can produce fire in her hands. There's a girl who can float. And there's Miss Peregrine, who is basically a time traveler. And so there's a bunch of these female time travelers. They're always females. They're always birds. They can turn to and from birds. They can also control time. So they set up these loops, which is essentially a 24-hour period that these kids live in perpetuity. So they remember everything, though, but they're like 80, 90 years old. They just look like kids and act like kids. So they live in these perpetual loops, and Jacob discovers this loop, and throughout the story he finds out that he's actually one of them, but his special power is kind of rare and unique in that he can see the monsters, the monster that killed his grandfather. None of the rest of them can, and that culminates into, of course, Monster on the Island. The big wrap-up for Act 3 is this whole, chase scene and battle and whatnot to try to save their time loop. I'm not going to spoil the end of the book, but I will say that it was a very enjoyable read, and especially the last probably quarter of the book, I just wanted to go. I just burned through it because it was just like, I need to learn the rest of the story, and it's at that point you start to learn the story. Prior to that, it's a really big, long setup. And the cool part about it is, the reason I think that it is this kind of big, long setup is Ransom Riggs wrote this book based on a collection of rare photographs. And they're scattered throughout the book. You can find all these peculiar photographs from history that he says at the back of the book. These are not edited photographs. These are actual all found photographs that he's written this story around. And that's how the book came to be. He has a collection of these photographs. He has friends who collect these photographs. They dig through old photos and find weird ones. And he wrote the book around those photographs. And it really works really well. He says the photos haven't been doctored, but they've definitely been doctored when the photos were made. You can tell like some of these are completely bizarre. Pasted on type stuff. But that build-up pays off in a very, very fun ending that is very open-ended, and of course there are 4 more of these. Overall, I really liked the book. I really enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed the main character. He really helped me answer a few questions about the character that I want to write. And his family situation is oddly familiar to mine, I guess. But I connected with him very well. I will say, I remember when this came out, it was like considered to be the next Harry Potter. It is not. Don't even go into it thinking that. I would say this is definitely not a children's book. I would even hesitate to call it middle grade. I would say it's more of a young adult book. It has some very macabre scenes. It is a very peculiar setting, and it's more of a thriller with a little bit of horror mixed in. So it's obviously, if it was the next Harry Potter, we would all be reading them and there'd be movies. There is a movie based on this book by Tim Burton. I will watch it, but from what I understand, it's altered the book quite a bit to be a film. So take with that what you will. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I plan on reading the rest when I get around to it. For now, I think I'm going to work on my story. I've done enough character study and enough setting studies and planning that it's getting to the point where if I continue to study, I'll never write the book because I'll continue to read and watch movies. So I would say read it if you're interested in that sort of thing. If you're not and you just want to look at cool photographs, find a copy to leaf through. It's really neat to see what old-timey photographs have in them. So thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing people. I appreciate you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, Doc, wait! I want to ask you something.
Today's random fact comes from Wikipedia. What is the Black Legend? The Black Legend, La Leyenda Negra, is a style of historical writing or propaganda that demonizes the Spanish Empire, its people, and its culture.